Davies is going to talk to us today. I've known Douglas for a long time, and he's going to talk on what some would view to be his favourite topic, the remorseful day.
Wow.
And it's a case that the one thing that you might be pleased about, or not pleased about, Douglas may refer to this later, is that he holds a postgraduate degree from the University of Uppsala. And the particular academic dress that goes with that makes him look as though he's part of a Bond film in areas of Southern America. He may refer to that later. In Mufti, Douglas Davies.
Thank you very much, John. Ladies and gentlemen, it's lovely being with you. In some parts of the university, they call me Dr. Death. So I get my revenge once a year when I turn up at the graduation ceremony wearing my Uppsala doctor's stuff. And it's a long, tall, black top hat, all black and white. You know, you're just like a funeral director. So I feel I get up on that great occasion. I started off my life as an anthropologist, did my first degree in anthropology, my first research in anthropology in Durham and in Oxford. I came back to Durham and read theology. And I spent the last, 40 years or something like that. Yes, something like that. Working on the interface between the social science of religion and with little bits of theology thrown in. I spent half my life studying Mormonism in the States and in the UK, and it's sort of one box of my life and another box of my life since the late 1880s, 1980s. I was just checking to see if you were awake. Looking at aspects of death ritual, focusing especially on cremation, the emergence of cremation in the world, Europe especially. And we edited the big encyclopedia of cremation, which took us 7 years, which is a big job. Done lots of work on woodland burial. I'll come round to that in the talk. And a lot of stuff on reusing graves in contemporary Britain. So lots of bits of focus research that I'm going to sort of bring together as we go through today. We start with ourselves, really. This talk is going all over the place. So when your little grey cells try to find deep logical flows between everything, you might not always find the deep logical flow. So don't worry about that. I thought for a Wednesday afternoon, looking at these great issues, we should remind ourselves that we are indeed symbolic animals. Some people searching very hard for meaning, some people searching a little bit, and most people sort of cutting off halfway up the track of meaning. Maybe in universities we press meaning a little bit further and want to know more stuff about more things, and with a bit of luck distribute that knowledge to other people on the way. The search for meaning underlies what we are as human animals, it seems to me. Are the lights, would it be better with the lights down a bit, do you think? What do you think? Let's just have a good look at these chaps. See how it goes. A bit better, I think, don't you think?
Yeah.
And probably if I asked each one of you, we'd get different answers to that question. But face recognition, the human animal is really good at it. Really good at it. For reasons of survival, I'm sure. We're coming at this issue of death, a lifestyle choice from many different angles today. People in the room. It might be that somebody has been bereaved very recently. Perhaps not. If you have, then we're sympathetic towards that and will understand if you wanted to get up and leave halfway through. It might well be. I teach a big class of death ritual and belief, and one or two members of it have quite bad bereavements every year as it goes on. Just recently happened last week for loss. So I fully understand if we get onto stuff that you just don't want to bother with. It's no problem, just go and put some tea or something. So I want to talk about the interplay between really what I call lifestyle and death style choices. Is the interplay between lifestyle and death style close? Imagine a glove. You put your hand in a glove and there's a very close fit between the glove and the hand. A close fit. Or some of us never bother with gloves and our gloves are in a drawer somewhere and there's no connection between the hand and the glove. I think life and death are a little bit like that. There are some people who, for a variety of circumstances, live quite close with death, maybe in their family or for some reason or other. Death is important to them, so that their lifestyle, if we can call it that, always has issues of death, I like to call it death style, close by. For others, death isn't on the horizon at all. And, you know, for most people aged between about 18 and 25 or something, one's immortal, really. One's going to live forever. It's great. And it's lifestyle all the way, and death style nowhere to be seen, until something happens to them in their family or something. And then they begin to think about this death style. And my most recent book is called Mors Botanica. It means British death. It wasn't my choice, it was the publisher's insistence. But the subtitle of it is Lifestyle and Death Style in Britain Today. So if you are so enraptured by this talk, you can go away, buy it, only 20 quid for 400 pages. That's pretty good value. Hardback, I can tell you. And you can pursue it. But it's that interplay of that particular idea. And in a way it takes us straight into the great issue in social science. It's also the issue in other academic areas, but it's in social science where you really notice it. The link between self and society. How on earth are you linked to society, to this abstract thing, the big S, society? How do you link with it? Some people are linked intimately with society. They've got children who are at school, who need the doctor. They've got elderly parents who need the National Health Service. They might be tied into a church or a mosque or a synagogue or some religious group, or they might be tied into a national party. There aren't many members of national parties at the moment, but they might be tied in as a member of this, that. The way we link with society varies tremendously. Some of us intimately, at many levels, some of us hardly at all. And I suppose one of the tasks of a university is to engage more of us more of the time in more society, social things. One of the areas in which that link between self and society has really come big time just now, really is in terms of assisted dying or assisted suicide. Difficult phrases, difficult terms. In our society, in Britain over the last, what is it, the political scientists amongst you would be able to tell me to the year, I'm just going to guess, for 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, our politicians keep telling us the choice is yours. You must choose. Where do you want your operation? Which hospital? Where do you want your children to go? Which school are you not going to get them into? The choice is yours. The choice is yours. Society is here to help you, to serve you. We've rather got into this mode of thinking about it. But of course, just now in our society, the choice is yours up to a point. You can't decide to kill yourself. Well, you can in terms of pure suicide, if I can call it that, but not in terms of assisted suicide. So that saying that was very popular several decades ago, it's my body and I can do what I like with it, has a great deal of truth with it, but not entire truth. It is your body, it is my body, but I can't do what I like with it, as far as assisted dying is concerned, because government, parliament, law says no at the moment, with big debates, of course, in the House of Lords, House of Commons over this. I trace them out in the book quite a bit. So this ultimate kind of issue, what's going to happen to me, is not mine to say. Now this is interesting, because whether you believe in God and you say, God gives, God takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord, or that Allah is the one who is whatever, however you designate God, the great traditions, by and large, see the divine as it were, responsible for your life. Flip that over on its back and talk about society instead of God, and the same thing is happening in Britain. Society tells you, society is the authority. Some people think this is quite wrong, some people think this is perfectly good. But the point I'm making is at this stage, in the early 21st century, the link between self and society, which is high on the consumerist side of life, is deeply significant in terms of assisted dying. When I think my end is nigh and I'm very ill on something or other, should I have the right to have help in dying? I'm not going to go pro or con on that just now, because in this room people who differ on that issue. I simply flag it up as a major aspect of lifestyle and death style choice, because look at it like this. If in my whole life I've taken responsibility for myself, I am master of my, as I might think, my destiny, then I want that to cover my death as well. Why should I have one attitude to my life and then all of a sudden I can't have the same kind of control factor in relation to death? So that's an interesting issue which is going to go on and intensify, I guess, over the next 5 to 10 years quite extensively. In thinking about such things, I want to pinpoint the issue of emotion in relation to logic, or feeling in relation to thinking. This is the great interplay, it seems to me, in starting to think about life experience. On the one hand, we have ideology, our thoughts, our philosophies of life, or our theologies of life. We have all these ideas, some of which we accept by tradition, from religions or politicians or families or wherever. We have these thoughts that sort of control us, but those thoughts are always driven, I like to think, by the steam of emotion underlying it. This is the way I like to approach this kind of issue. Do you know, in the whole of my life, I have never had one of these in my hand with a pointer in it. So this is a career development moment, which is, well now that'll definitely have to come off the film. How have I survived to this point in my life without one of these? And I'm beginning to wonder, actually. I like to think, I mean, there are thousands of ideas in the world, ideas about everything. Thousands, millions of ideas. They come and they go. But interestingly, some ideas get an emotion attached to them. So if you take a word like mother, coffee, democracy, God. For many people, there are strong emotional values attached to those things. And they're not just ideas, they're important ideas. In fact, I think they're values. The one an emotion gets attached to an idea, perfuses it, then you have a value. Values are sort of important to people. Other ideas, well, they come and they go. When a value enters into your identity, then it seems to me you get a belief. And by belief there, there's no necessity of it being God or the spirits or anything. It's belief. It's a sense that this value really means something to me. I mean, for example, in our society just now, the idea man, the idea woman, for the vast number of people has an emotion attached, and gender carries a value. For some people, and great issues on transgender, for example, just now, where an idea, let's just use the word transgender, which for many people might just be an idea. For some people, not just has an emotion attached, but actually helps give you a sense of identity. Contributes to your identity. At this point, it seems to me, you now have a belief. You can take it another step again, and you can say, some beliefs frame destiny. What will my life be after this life, or beyond, or something? At that point, it seems to me that when beliefs frame destiny, you get religious belief. We could argue over this. This is my shorthand way of getting into understanding sort of how people tick and how societies tick, if I can put it like that. In this book I spell all this stuff out quite extensively, and so on and so forth. Nice little artistic piece there, a painting from Liz Burt, the good wife of the Master of Hatfield College. She's an artist. I like her paintings a lot, so we decided we'd put one on the front cover of the book, and they're standing stones on one of the Scottish islands. Which brings me really to a key kind of issue, looking at death as a lifestyle choice, and that's hope. What is hope? Seems to me that hope is not just an idea, but an idea that's got an emotion attached. It's a value. For some people, hope is part what makes their life feasible, becomes a belief, and for some people it's about life after as well. Their destiny becomes a religious belief. Hope is a big word. And it seems to me that what hope is that it's a cultural expression. At the level of culture, of these wonderful thought worlds that we create as human animals, that hope is at the cultural level what the biological drive to survive, or what the drive to survive is at a biological level. When you hear a rabbit that's just been caught by the dogs, it screams. Rabbits don't normally make big noises. They do. It wants to survive. It's just going to be killed. Tough luck. It's very interesting, the drive to survive, that when we become humans, when we develop culture, have we lost our drive to survive? No, we sometimes talk about the will to live. We say something when people are sick or in hospital, that they keep on because they've got the will to live. And this is tied up with hope. People might hang on for a few months because they're waiting for their son to come back from Australia to see them, then they'll die. Or they wait for Christmas to come, and they see Christmas over, or the birth of the grandchild, and then they'll die. Hope has been realized. Now it's okay to go. So hope is a big concept, seems to me, in this whole area, and maybe it's an issue we don't discuss as often as we should. In the history of humankind, of course, hope has had this post-mortem world to it, hope beyond death, but also in the world as it is increasingly in parts of it, as secular ideas, non-religious ideas, ideas some people would talk about as being spiritual but not religious or whatever. There's a sense that we could think about hope and the realized life. When will you be happy to die, ladies and gentlemen? When will you realize, when will we realize our life? We think it's okay. And this is quite an important issue for us in universities, where so many people come up with so many ambitions for so many things, so many disappointments lying in front of them, as well as realizations. The hope and the realized life is a kind of a philosophical style issue that is worth us thinking about, especially in terms of that assisted dying thing. Has my life been now realized, fulfilled? Am I now ready to die? And yet somebody else might say, well, I can't understand that. The great differences that go on in our being. The options for that hope, I suppose, we'll look at these in a moment. The one I was just talking about, life completed in itself. I've lived my life, I've done what I've done, and that's great. Some will say, no, I use the word paradise here, it's a great word from the Hebrew Bible, it's there in Islamic texts, it's there in Christianity. This garden of pleasure beyond the grave, paradise. This, if you stop to think about it, is a really remarkable concept. As far as I'm aware, rabbits don't think that there's a great warren in the sky to which they'll go after the dog has just killed them. And I'm not aware, of course, as to whether any animal species has any notion of an afterlife. why on earth should the human animal conceive, in all the cultures that we can think of more or less, how on earth should it conceive of there being another existence? That's an interesting philosophical question. And it's not just a question of religion, it's a question of human evolution. What adaptive significance has there been in belief in an afterlife? Because all these great religious traditions have developed it in one shape or form. Sometimes just ancestors, of course, but many things. Or it could be just in memory, that I will live on in memory. This is a big bit of name dropping now, but sometime year before last, there was a telly program. Oh no, this is all being videoed. Now that story will remain in my mind and not go anywhere else. But there are some people, some great people in the world, for whom they will live in other people's memories. They write books, and yeah, they will read my books after I'm dead, and so on. The way we conceive of our own post-mortality, as it were. And in a sense, having a bit of hope, different sorts of hope in these. And now our society is becoming increasingly diverse, and this is interesting. So in a room like this, there will be, we're a very small sample. If we were a much bigger one, I've done lots and lots of research on afterlife beliefs. And, you know, take a sample of one big thing, we did 1,600 people, we interviewed them in their own homes. Good measured sample. And there you've got it. Those who believe in afterlife, those who don't, how they believe in it, and the gender split is enormous. In Britain today, it'll say it'll be something like twice as many women as men will believe in a life after. That's quite interesting, that the gender divide should be as enormous as it is. How does that link into hope? How does that link into survival? There are lots of interesting issues going on there. The options are there, and we live in a society where we've got these groups. These, yeah, they believe they're going to paradise, they believe they're going to heaven, these believe there's absolutely nothing, these look forward to living on in their children, and yet we're all in the same society. This is a wonderful mixing of life perspectives, of values, of beliefs, of religious beliefs. And I suppose learning to live with that is quite an interesting phenomenon in itself. Now in this lecture, let me look pretty rapidly at some of these forms of symbolic meaning beyond death. You are very familiar with these already, but it's nice to think about them again as we move on. Now, let's talk for a moment about resourcing symbols, because we are symbolic animals, meaning-making symbolic animals. We've sort of covered that, and in a way, I'm trying to show how to link natural symbols, we might call them, cultural symbols, things like the seasons, all the great classics which humans have used for a long time about thinking about life, earth itself, fire, life-giving, life-taking, water, life-giving, life-taking, wind, life-giving, life-taking, so it goes on and on. Plants, trees and animals. There are lots of things that are symbolic resources when we try to think about our life, when we think about our death, and how we link them. But look how people take some, you might say, the oddest of things. In our society just now, candles, and in Western Europe, candles are everywhere. The moment there's a catastrophe, candles will be out. People will light them on the pavement outside a house where a baby's being burnt in a fire or something. Balloons. I do a lot of work with colleagues in Holland, where ritual invention is enormous. So events in cemeteries where everybody's letting off balloons as though there was no tomorrow. Tattoos, there'll be very few people in Stephenson College. There's probably nobody. There's somebody out there with tattoos linked to some memory. Perhaps family memory. Poems, music, so many resources for symbols. In terms of traditional Christianity, Christianity is in many ways a death conquest program. Ancient Judaism wasn't so much a death conquest program. Christianity became a big death conquest program. Islam, following on from it, also became a big death conquest program. Hinduism is an enormous death conquest program. They just do the death conquest conquest in different ways. Some is death, resurrection, souls. In the Indian traditions is transmigration, karma, you get born again. Death conquest takes many forms, but it's there. And I put this in, eschatology is the theological word for the end of stuff. Eschatological, when I come to the end of my life, when I die, when I'm judged or whatever. Then, in traditional Christianity, and you probably could say the same for Islam too, then there's a fulfillment of my identity. Who I am now is not what I will be then. So hope has got this kind of forward-looking thing, like, as we might say, oh, when the vacation comes, it'll be great. When I finish my finals, it'll be great. When I complete my PhD, it'll be wonderful. The eschatological hope, as it were. And we can look at this in a way, I take this as a very interesting example. This is a sculpture out above the main door in All Souls College in Oxford. Christ is there in glory on the clouds, the little angels are around, and the dead are sort of rising. They've got interesting haircuts, these resurrecting creatures. All Souls College was built in the 15th century. It was set up by Henry VI as a place to pray for the dead. It was to pray for the dead in wars with France. So it was filled with priests whose job was to pray for the souls of those who were in the afterlife. There's the corpse down there before it even moves. Also, it's probably one of the most intellectually advanced, if that's the right word, place in all university colleges in the world. It's no undergraduates in it. It has a handful of postgrads who are remarkable, and it has a large number of academics who are best of the world in their field. This interests me, that the place that was set up to pray for the souls of the dead in the 15th century becomes the most intellectually focused and, you might say, secular place by the 20th, 21st century. It's a very good example of social change and of engagement of lifestyle and death style. My old supervisor was a fellow at All Souls, and he died, 3 years ago now. And I went back for his funeral in the College of All Souls, in the chapel of All Souls. And I was one of the guys who spoke. I was one of his old students, and 3 other colleagues from different aspects of his life. And it was a secular funeral. So a secular funeral officiant took it, whilst the college chaplain sat humbly, sat it out. I thought, how interesting. But one of the other speakers, who was a very distinguished sociologist, said that he couldn't possibly say a word at the funeral of his dear friend in the chapel that was set up to pray for the dead. He couldn't possibly not make that point in what was acknowledgedly a secular event. Marvellous symbolic mixing of things, you might say. We're so familiar with headstones and graves, which are personal yet public. Now this is where we come to that link between self and society again. When you think of your family members who are dead and you think of their graves, some of you will think of them as very personal places. You might go there to talk to them or whatever. They're very personal places, yet they're also public places. And this is very interesting, this interplay of private and public, of self and society. The Church of England is very pompous sometimes, and often very careful about what words it will allow to be put on headstones. And some families get very worked up about this. Why can't I say, well, I can't think of something sloppy enough, but why can't I say, Grandshire, I loved you when you took your teeth out? Do you know what I mean? From some little child. I wouldn't allow that. It wouldn't be tasteful enough. Of course, taste refers to the public nature of what's going on there, the social nature, whereas a little boy who wants to talk about how lovely his grandfather was when he smiled without his teeth in. No. So these interesting points of interplay, and we are very familiar with them. That's a grave, a recent grave. Wonder what your little grey cells make of that. Is it tasteful? Is it creepy? Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? It's a civic cemetery, so it doesn't come under Church of England propriety in that sense. But somebody has chosen to put marble hands. Now, I've got to be a responsible social scientist, and I've got to tell you that if these hands, well, that's odd, isn't it? Look, it's got a thumb. Oh, it's because I photographed it, I suppose. But if we turn those hands around, then you would see in them a little statue of the Virgin Mary. That it's a Catholic grave, I'm assuming, and it's not creepy, but when you look at it the right way, there is the Virgin Mary, so it carries then deep significance. More private than public, you might say, more self and society. I've taken all these, these are from fairly local ones. This is from Siam, not very far away. A headstone, traditional headstone, but look at it. Blood and fire, promoted to glory. Because the guy there is from the Salvation Army. So here you've got an institutional engagement with society. And the Salvation Army don't say somebody has died, they say he's promoted to glory, using the motif of promotion for an army. That's interesting. And that's indicative more of, if you like, the institutional public than the private. Or what about treasured memories of a much-loved dad, granddad and brother? Very traditional in many ways, of course. But then you've got a connection with wider society there. There's both family, if you like, family and football. This part of the world not an insignificant link. Nana, Mam. Classic private expression, but telling you who it's about. Then the relation between self and society, if we look at certain what we might call transitional sites. Now there's some anthropologists who talk about non-places, a non-place, a place devoid of significance. I have my own thoughts about this, but let's not go down there too much for the moment. How do we turn, as human animals, we want to bring symbolic significance to pretty well everything. You know, you can look at the clouds and before long you see faces of them. We are conditioned psychologically to create meaning in the funniest of configurations. We just do it. We do it in places where we want to bring emotion to a place. It's like bringing that emotion to an idea. Imagine 150 yards stretch of road, or meters if you like, where your son has died on a motorbike. Road is road. It's nothing. It's a non-place. Not for long these days, because before you know where you are, you're going to have these kind of, these phenomena, where flowers, multiplicity of symbols, put together to make somewhere significant, to bring significance to where there was no significance just before. And obviously this was very meaningful to a poor child whose father was killed there. These are things that we are very familiar with, but their depth of significance is really profound, I suppose, in our society. Or look at that one, not far from here at all, where one of these roadside ones is running close to a war memorial. There you've got self and society, very public symbolic expression. Here you've got a more private symbolic expression, but the fact that they are in the same space together adds a whole new symbolic significance to what's going on there. Or Darlington, fairly recently, public space near B&Q, where poor Rhys Oliver Hewitt, who was aged 14 years of age, was obviously killed. Always in our thoughts, forever in our hearts. We're familiar with these things, but it's drawing that familiarity out, I suppose, which is one of the things that interests my anthropological mind. But then what about the great change that came about in Europe, in Britain especially, in the late 19th century? Cremation. We could talk a very long time about this, but I won't bore you too much. In the late 1980s, when it dawned on me that it might be a good idea to study secular ritual, because a friend of mine had been studying it in the Soviet Union, I thought I would do register office weddings, and it was so boring. I thought, no. Probably I should have done, because they've grown. So I'll study crematoria. And in the late 80s, there was no study of crematoria at all. Now, it's truly remarkable in terms of research that by the late 1980s, the majority of funeral rites in Britain were cremations. We were then getting up to the 60-odd, 64, 65, can't remember the percentage, but we were well over the half. Not a solitary social science research paper on the fact that Britain had moved from being a burial culture to being a cremation culture. I couldn't believe this. I thought, this is too good to be true. You know, one can make a reputation by studying this stuff. Find a niche and fill it is one way to become academically successful, I suppose. But we led the field there, and it's a great story as to how we did. And I don't want to go into it too much now. But what I do want to point your attention to, and I don't want you to get number blind on this particular table, is how cremation really developed in Europe. I've chosen just a few countries. Just look at the UK for a moment. I'm just choosing 1952, 62 and 2012. In the Encyclopedia for Cremation, we've got every year from the beginning to 2012 for all the countries we could get, for those of you who want lots of data. But Britain is interesting. In the 1950s, we were quite low. By 62, we were still low, but rising now rapidly. And we get into the 50s, into the 60s. By the end of the 60s and early 70s, by 2012, we'd up to 74%, and we're just about there now, a little bit more. Interesting progression. Somewhere like Sweden, not dissimilar, really, not dissimilar. Somewhere like Norway, not dissimilar. Look at Germany. Germany's very interesting, really. Because if I put a table up extending the years back down there, you would have found that before the Second World War, Germany was in advance of Britain in its cremation rates. In fact, Germany was a centre for engineering of cremators. They were at the forefront of creating cremation machines. Dresden was a centre for cremation art and design. It was quite remarkable. Then the Second World War, then the Holocaust, then the cremation of all those poor Jews and other groups of society who were not deemed worthy of existence. Post-war, German guilt, shame, something big, something cultural, an idea, cremation, has now quite a different emotion attached to it than it had pre-war. Not in these other countries, they go on, but in Germany now, more recent ones are moving up into the 60s. The new young German generations are, as it were, losing that particular shame, if shame it is. I cite cremation as one example of the way in which symbolism works, because out of cremation come cremated remains, and you can do things with them which bring additional meaning to your life, to your family's life. You take the cremated remains and you put them somewhere of significance to yourselves. The British are very lawless in this. We really got this going in the late 1970s, and now most families have got some ashes somewhere. I've done lots of work with Scandinavians and the Dutch, and until fairly recently they would look at you blankly if you started talking about the British doing things with cremated remains. Because in all those countries, rules, laws control it all. and you'd need the ashes buried after 6 weeks or 6 months. They were controlled. Whereas the Brits were just out there doing all sorts of things. Quite interesting, actually. Kind of ritual symbolic freedom which emerged. This has led to interesting things today, where churches have to negotiate the ritual with families as to what on earth they're going to do in a ceremony and with remains. This is interesting. Another interesting link between self and society. If you say, you know, the big churches were once society at death's door, they would have their rituals for death. The people went along and they got ritual off the shelf, as it were. Now, not like that at all. You will say what music you want, what readings you want, what you want to do, all sorts of ritual negotiation, a new sort of aspect of ritual life. And this is very interesting because when you look back in time, it's very difficult. You know, in the early Christian era, the Romans switched from cremation to burial at one point, and sometimes they switched back the other way. And it's very difficult for archaeologists to know why they do this. And very difficult to get answers for it half the time. Partly it's to do with style, fashion, and we can't pin it down. But these are big issues in terms of self-fulfillment, I suppose. What we want, how we think our lives would be better if a person had their ashes put here or there, or split up. Because the great thing about ashes is that a family could divide it into 6 and let the 6 sons and daughters have a bit. You can't do that with a corpse. It wouldn't be legal. All sorts of ritual creativity, cultural creativity, which an innovation makes possible. I've done lots of work on different crematoria. I thought I would just show you one, which from the outside looks the most artistically challenging. It's the Milton Keynes crematorium. Well, look at it, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing. If you didn't know that was a crem, you'd think it was a, I don't know, place to get your car tyres changed or something. But once you get inside, and I've not got slides with me today from the inside, it's remarkable. It's beautiful. All sorts of stained glass, but not with religious pictures in them, but with funny configurations and stuff. And probably there'd be one person in this room who would stand there, look at them and say, ah. Because the configuration are things like mathematical formulae, schematized, the formulae that the architects use in the construction of the roof and the building. So the plans for the building have been turned into art itself. Quite amazing, really, and odd, you might say. A poem by John Betjeman, Aldershot, crematorium. Between the swimming pool and cricket ground, how straight the crematorium driveway lies, and little puffs of smoke, without a sound, show what we loved dissolving in the skies. Dear hands and feet, and laughter-lighted face, and silk that hinted at the body's grace. But no one knows quite what to say. Friends are so altered by the passing years. Well, anyhow, it's not so cold today, and thus we try to dissipate our fears. I am the resurrection and the life, strong, deep and painful, doubt inserts the knife. John Betjeman, of course, one of those poets who captures English spirit in a way in which very few others have, and renders it in poetry that's intelligible, and really is capturing a 1950s, early 60s scene here, because you will now find it quite difficult to find little puffs of smoke. Chimneys don't churn it out in crams now as once they used to. But it's very interesting, capturing of that self and society and this dead person, no one seems to know quite what to say. I was at a funeral last week and I couldn't believe this, because a woman I didn't know who happened to be standing next to me at one point, she quite literally said to me, "Why do we always talk about how nice it is at funerals? Or how nice a day it is at funerals?" And I said, "Oh, there we are." And this went through my mind as she said that. But poetry itself, really, in use in lifestyle, death style today, there will be very few funerals in Britain just now where some member of the family doesn't produce some sort of rhyme, some sort of poem, or some sort of reading that is almost poetic. Those literary scholars who are into style will of course find many of these poems radically unsatisfactory, because they'll be rhyming stupidly. What does that matter? As somebody's trying to use a poem to say something that they just can't say in a sentence, as it were. So the role of literature in this, and I mean this is very interesting. "I am the resurrection and the life," one of the sentences from the Bible that the priest would use at the crematorium, at the funeral service. And Betjeman, who was a churchman with many doubts, we might say, parallels the textual, the sacred text, with his own remarkable line when you stop to think about it. So we have our cremated remains, or cremains if you speak American English, going all sorts of places, doing all sorts of things. I'll say more about that now. Let me move very rapidly as I move towards concluding with something we spent quite a lot of time on over the last 5 years. We got an AHRC grant, so I must thank the Arts and Humanities Research Council for a collaborative doctoral award to work on woodland burial. It was only in the mid-1990s, 1993-94, that the first woodland burial site was created in Britain by Mr. Ken West at Carlisle. To my great, there are moments of tremendous pleasure in university life, and one of them was when Durham decided that it would give Ken West an honorary Master of Arts degree, not this Christmas, but the Christmas before. Because here's a guy, leaves school at 14, terrible family background, poor, gardening apprentice, works his way up to be a manager of a creme, works his way up by night school and all sorts of other ways to be a leading figure in the British world of funeral directing, and really is the man who has led to us now having as many woodland burial sites as we have crematoria. So what it took cremation from the 1880s to now to do, it's taking just 20 years for these woodland burial sites to emerge. Of course, they're still cremating very small, they're still very small numbers in them. Nobody really knows what the percentage is. Small, but it's happening. So here I bring Ken West in to this talk because of the importance of individuals in our society. In our sort of society, we are very used to having top-down administration. They'll tell us what's going to happen, and open your hands, here comes what the Parliament says. But some very important things sometimes happen bottom up. And that Ken West should be the guy who kick-started this woodland burial stuff, which is now everywhere, is a great testament to this. Tonight, he's arriving just about now in Durham. I'll see him tomorrow. We've got another kind of Ken West. We've got David Childs coming to Durham, and if any of you is interested, tomorrow, Friday night at 5 o'clock, a guy called David Childs, whom I'll show you in a minute, is giving a talk. Another innovator from the bottom up. So there are many sites of this kind of woodland burial emerging. I'll give you 3 Durham cases. One part of a traditional cemetery, one semi-rural setting, and one fully rural setting, to show how this concept, this idea, has had different sort of emotions brought to it. This is at sea, I'm fairly near here. I mean, grave, name, tree. Grave, name, tree. Very uniform, an early sort of attempt at this process. This is the Durham City Side South Road up beyond Euston Off College. Getting to look a little bit more woody, a bit more natural. New grave just gone in there. There it is. And here's another one, much nearer to where we are today actually, Brewhouse Woodland Burials. And there you are into much more woody things, new trees planted, a lot of older trees around as well, new graves going in, no headstones, so on and so forth. People nevertheless putting up little markers. If ever there comes a day when we can't be together, keep me in your heart, I'll stay there forever. The human sentiment. Lifestyle, death style maybe. What role did these little ones play in that person who was dead? Perhaps he or she told stories. And this is the site we worked on down near the Cambridge one, the Arboretum Trust one. We've interviewed lots of the people who had relatives buried there and those who've signed up to it. We've got a 30-minute film on it as well. I've not brought any of that with me today. That was very important because the film was part funded by the Wilson Institute just across the way there. We're very grateful to them for money for that. New choices, new self-image, grave, my grave. What emotion do I bring to that idea to create a value? And it seems to me that in the woodland burial stuff, this is what's happening. The idea of grave is having new emotions attached to it, creating a new kind of value, the value of woodland burial, contributing to people's sense of identity. I'm going to go in there, ba-boom, ba-boom, and we've got lots and lots of accounts of these. The book, for those of you interested, is called Natural Burial, Traditional Secular Spiritualities and Funeral Innovation. Hannah Rumble was my doctoral student on that one, great girl, Durham anthropologist. And we were looking at what people are bringing to the natural burial site. They want to give something back to the earth, an affinity with nature. I've been a gardener. She was a gardener all her life. She would much prefer to be here. Then a small group of people, single women, older single women especially, who up until now would have been cremated. They didn't want to be cremated, but they definitely didn't want to be in a traditional cemetery with a headstone that nobody could look after. There seems to be something of cultural shame in Britain about having a grave that nobody could look after. It's very interesting. So that the grave as an idea brings now the value, the emotion of shame to it, if you see what I mean, as this process goes on. But in these places, of course, there's no need for a headstone, because nature, as it were, looks after it all. And I think that's an interesting unintended consequence of it. And others talking about it being park-like. Oh, this fascinated me. Being like a garden centre, someone was saying. The time is ripe now for somebody to do a paper on the rise of the garden centre as an idiom of post-mortality. I mean, there must be lots of work on this. But have you noticed, I'm quite a keen gardener, so I go to garden centres to buy plants. Over the last 5 or 6, 8 years, garden centres stick restaurants on. They're a little coffee shop now, they become restaurants. And on Sunday they're full of middle-aged people taking their elderly parents for Sunday lunch. Not to buy plants. Very interesting. So it's interesting to me that we have cases of people talking about their grave in a woodland burial site like going to a garden centre. The way in which cultural idioms seep, the seepage of cultural idioms between them. Absolutely fascinating. Speaking of living sites, the earth vital, alive. It changes with the seasons. Plants are growing alive. The film, if I had the film on, I'd be loving it. The birds are flying, you know, insects are doing this stuff, growing alive. Animals and insects, different from the traditional grave, as one of the informants put it, dry as dust. And this is very interesting, the symbolic comparison between dryness and wetness. Very interesting. In the Hebrew Bible, it's very interesting that wetness is the sign of life. Dryness is the sign of death. So the myth of creation is told in terms of the Spirit of God moving like a mist. Mists are wet on the face of the earth and causing the mud, the dust to become mud. And God makes, in that mythical way of talking, people out of the dust of the earth. It's wetness as opposed to dryness. So it was very interesting for people with no knowledge of that sort of mythological background at all, using these kind of wet, dry motifs. The final then, no, may not need, penultimate. Another innovation, British, another innovation. 2001 saw the opening of the National Memorial Arboretum near Lichfield. The centre of the UK is the way they talk about themselves geographically. 150 acres, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I've got a feeling I'm wrong there, but so if we ignore that, I must cut it out. My maths were wrong, I think. But it's got 200 odd memorials in it. This is a remarkable, cultural innovation is interesting. How do nations grow their stuff? The site was this 150 acres of gravel pits, a kind of a no place. Gravel pits are as near to a non-place as you can get, I think. And they created a big hill on it. There is already a prehistoric mound there, off-site a bit. They built a hill, and on this hill constructed great walls that run right the way around it, covered with the names of the dead, larger than life statues, this great pillar. This is the National Memorial for the military, this bit, and around it 101, as it were, other memorial sites. That's one of them to the armed forces. Wanted to capture the blackness of it, the stark realism of this stuff. It's Britain doing its war thing, big time. The Durham Light Infantry is there. You've seen that guy in Durham Market Square as well. It's the same statue, actually. Not the same statue, but the same statue. And it's full of memorials to, you name it, neonatal deaths. Sands is there. Memorials to dogs that died in Northern Ireland, duty. St. John's Ambulance. If there's a national institution, it's got a memorial there. More of which in half a minute. I was down there for their annual big get-together day this year. This dear lady is there singing songs of the First and Second World War, getting people in the spirit, in the mood, before the much more religious kind of venture took place. This is there. What do you make of that one? A guy just standing there. What did he have on his chest? A medal? No. The target at which they would shoot him at dawn. And here, ranged behind him, posts, each with a name and the age of these guys, most of them aged between sort of 18 and 23. Probably largely post-traumatic stress, shot at dawn. On the 7th of November 2006, the British government agreed to give a posthumous pardon to all of those executed for military offences in the First World War. Self and society. It's my body, I can do it, I like it. No, we'll shoot you if you deserve it. And the families of those people petitioned for this to come about, and it has. And when you go there, you've got to hunt to find it. It's not easily found because the trees are not just behind, but the trees are all around everywhere. You go in, and this rather stark concrete statue is there. This is, if you like, another side of the lifestyle, death style, life of Britain in its military mode. This is David Childs. He's an Anglican layperson. He conducted this event on that day. And he's arriving in Durham just about now. He's giving a lecture to my class tomorrow and giving his talk on Friday at 5 o'clock in Elbert Riverside, if you're interested. Royal Navy man. Royal Navy man all his life, liaising between the UK Navy and US Navy. Spends a lot of time in Washington, D.C. I'm expecting David to tell this story tomorrow with passion. I'm sure he will. He's over there, he has got a bit of spare time. He goes to look at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Same day he goes to look at the Arboretum, the national collection of trees there. He goes to bed and his little grey cells start working. He wakes up and he says, we must have in Britain something that combines the trees and the memories of the dead. He's flying back in the aeroplane, not on his own wings, obviously. He's flying back, and he reads in the paper that it's announced in Parliament that there's to be a new national memorial for the military, and that it's going to be in London. David says in himself, no, not in London. He comes back, and then the British Old Boys Network gets to work. And against enormous difficulties, and they were enormous difficulties. He gets the money in, he gets people organised, he changes the government. So they now announce in the House, yeah, there is going to be it, but it's not going to be in London, it's going to be on a gravel pit in Lichfield. And it's there to this day. Now he's coming up because we are discussing the possibility of a research project, looking at this great area, because my idea, my hypothesis, my assumption is that this 150 acre with 200 odd symbolic entities on it, that somehow or other, and theoretically I don't know how this is yet, somehow or other, if you can capture the symbolic significance of each of those, you are capturing the symbolic nature of British life. I don't know fully what that means, but I'm sure it's true. And we'll find out. We're going to do a project together on that. And we hope to get the students of Hatfield College involved in that, because they are interested in this filmmaking just now. That's one of the memorials there, in beautiful glass, the kind of glass they make out at the Glass Museum near here. So what about the future then? Well, lifestyle and death style, how will it link up? Just a couple. Resumation. Process thought up by an engineer in Glasgow to create. This is not, I've taken this from their company page, and it's not transferred very well. A chamber, put the body in, close the door, like those decompression chambers that you use for deep sea divers and stuff. And high pressure alkaline solution dissolves the body in about 2 hours, leaves white ash, so you're dissolving the body, not cremating the body. They use it in a couple of medical schools in the States already for bodies that they're finished with. Not used in Britain as yet, but I'm guessing 10 years we probably will, so that you'll go into a crematorium and you'll have the resumator there in the room, as it were, and you'll have the cremator there. So you'll have your funeral director will come along by the time you're all ready for kicking the bucket. You'll have a choice beforehand. Do you want to be burned or drowned? You know, do you want to be cremated or? And that's one of the sort of possibilities. Cremation is a Swedish lady who has a marvellous system. Again, it's not used in Britain yet. You take the body, you freeze dry it with nitrogen or something, I suppose. Then you shake the living daylights out of it, which turns us into mincemeat style stuff. You allow that to rehydrate. You bury it under about 4 to 6 inches. You cover it with a meter square metal plate to stop animals getting at it, and you rot fast. Point, it is not deep burial, so you rot quickly by that kind of process. and doubtless others will come along before very long. My point is, there's a lot of innovation in the funerary world. When I did a survey 3 years ago of British crematoria, I asked them whether their creme showed any interest in resumation, in the dissolving, and at that point, no. But, yes. I'm guessing, and that was early on, I'm guessing that will grow in interest, and who knows, we'll have those. I said to my students, what are you going to call a crematorium? If it's now not just doing cremation, but doing resumation as well. If you've got dissolving under pressure, plus burning under heat. Isn't it a nice name for having, you know? So if you come up with a good name, combined name for those two places, let me know. I'll give you a nice bottle of wine or whatever takes your fancy. Don't spend much time on this. It's just to pick up the issue, back to where we started with meaning making, how people do it, whether it's through sacred, secular, mixed ritual. We're now seeing that sort of mixture much, much more. Death's reality, it's there in literature. In the new book I've just produced, I've got half a chapter on Harry Potter, death in Harry Potter, and half a chapter on death in Tom Brown's school days. Many of you will not know Tom Brown's school days. It was published in 1858 and it's never gone out of print since, about the boys' public school system in Britain and how to become a Christian man. And Tom, and it's very interesting, because Tom really thinks his headmaster, the famous Dr. Arnold of Rugby, was the greatest thing since sliced bread. He leaves school just before he goes to Oxford. A group of them go off fishing in Scotland. They're well-off little lads, obviously. And while they're fishing, one of the guys says, "Hey, Arnold, your old headmaster's dead." And then the text describes Tom's feelings as he's just told that the man he really loved was dead. And you could read it straight out of a grief counselling handbook written yesterday. It's just amazing, you know, how he responds to this. And Harry Potter again, and I think there's generations now of youngsters whose images, whose cultural, those cultural resources, symbolic resources, have come out of Harry Potter. Great fan of those. Celebrity images, whether it's Harry Potter or elsewhere, media deaths, there have been enough of them, big. In our own society just now, issues of people like suicide bombers, are they martyrs or are they brainwashed? Again, will depend on which group you view them from. In the same way in early Christianity, you could say, were they martyrs or were they brainwashed? Big issues about lifestyle and death style, how self and society links in, so on and so forth. Our identity fulfillment, our identity depletion, big, different directions in which our integration of lifestyle and death style go. That brings me to my very last slide. There it is. The event, your death, my death. What are you going to do about it? It's quite important, I suppose, in some ways. Where is the hand and the glove? Is your death glove so hidden at the back of a drawer that you give it no thought whatsoever, so that if, sadly and unfortunately, you were killed tomorrow, your poor family wouldn't know what on earth to do with you? What did she want? What did he want? Quite important to talk about these things with one's family, I think. That's my personal view. You might disagree with me radically. But it takes a lot of burden off people. If, oh, she said she'd like. That's helpful, maybe. Or do you leave it for them to decide? Bringing our mortality glove onto our vitality hand. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've gone around the houses rather a lot in that, but I've hoped to try and show how that link between self and society is enormous and complicated, but comes to a variety of sharp focal points when we take our mortality as the key. Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
wasn't actually asked of us, but usually your average academic takes the view that if people are willing to quiz them even further after they've spoken to you for an hour, they usually say yes. So I'm working on the principle that he would say yes if any of you have any questions you'd like to ask him now. Of course, there is the other opportunity or option, which is to say Davies is going to come and eat with us, and on that basis you can also quiz him round a meal table. But if anybody's got a burning question they want to ask, particularly from amongst those of you who are foregoing the pleasures of eating across at the waterside, then anybody have any questions?
Sure.
At which point, of course, I usually have to fill in with one. So I'll fill in with one while they're thinking. Though you actually got to it exactly the point. I had written this down as a time before that, which was events. And I just wondered what your thoughts were that actually funerals now are judged as an event.
Yes.
So there's a judgment on it. So and further on to that, they're judged. He would have liked it. It was soulless.
Yes.
There really wasn't much of an event. Or she would have loved the party afterwards.
Yes.
I expected her to arrive. Those sorts of things. So they're judged an event. And I just wondered if we want more of an event. A, because they're left less often. You have to wait a long time for one of them. Often, until you get to yours and my sort of age, when actually they come around rather too often.
Yeah.
But there's a long time for them. But also because families don't all live in the same town. So they're actually an opportunity rather, and people say, I'm sorry to see you here, but and then have a thundering good time.
Yeah. No, I think they all hang together very neatly. Yes, I think event, they become more of an event. And I think they become more of an event, partly because we all go to fewer funerals, because we have smaller families and fewer die than would have been the case even 50 years ago. I think that's the case. But I also think that because there's a great decrease in northern Western Europe of belief in an afterlife, the emphasis on this life, on the life lived, becomes all the more significant. So the celebration of life is something people now quite often talk about. And the social class is important here. If you're middle or upper middle in class, you are likely to have not just a funeral, but maybe a memorial event afterwards, as a split rite. This was never the case in Britain, really, that you would have the funeral and the funeral would be it, and it would be biggish if you were a significant social person, which is back to self and society. The bigger your social presence, the bigger your funerary presence. Or nowadays, the smaller your funerary presence and the bigger your memorial event. And weeks or months later, when you all gather and everybody does their thing about you. So the splitting of the event for the socially privileged. For most working class people, that would not be the case. The funeral would be it. And it's one of the most interesting distinctions between social class in Britain today and of fame, if you like, how big an society presence you have as to whether you have a memorial event afterwards or not. I think he would have liked is a very interesting one, because with the decline of the set funeral, a choice as to what to do becomes more pressured on people, especially if they've never told you what they want. So you've got to put something on which you think they would have liked. So to say he would have liked it, she would have wanted, is a way of justifying what you have decided to do, which is quite interesting, because I suppose the anthropological ears are never listening to just what the people say, but as it is what's perhaps behind what the people say. So I think that's absolutely right. And we'll get more of it, I think. And of course with the rise now of whole groups of people, because you can go and set one of my research students has done it already. She set herself up as a funeral celebrant, because you don't need any qualifications for it. You can just set yourself up cards and a web page and you're away. To spend a lot of time with the family, finding out about the person, so that you're giving a narrative of the departed self, not statements about their anticipated future, safe in the arms of Jesus or something. The dynamic shift, I think, is there, yeah.
Do you find that there's a lot of people now planning and organising their own funerals? Because you see it advertised quite a lot to pay for it now and then the burden's not passed down.
Yes. the big funeral companies and insurance companies have gone into this moderately big time, and they select the times of the day when they advertise it as well. Afternoon television, you must watch too much afternoon television. You'll often get the co-op. I've done a lot of work with a co-op, and they're a great bunch of guys, really. Guys and dolls, and they're men and women. Got to be so careful about these things these days. Yeah, so that, and it's very interesting looking at the web pages or the literature that's produced for this sort of stuff. What emotions are they picking up on in terms of you deciding what you want, taking the pressure off your family, getting what you want, back to this choice business with which I started really, and the financial bit, so that the money will be there to pay for it. It's a little bit like what happened in the 19th century Britain when people got little clubs together to put money aside for their funeral. So it's going on, and it's getting quite big, and it's feeding a sense of realism, I think, in some folk that I'm preparing for my funeral, and especially in this area of choice for people may not be church people and think that they must have a vicar or something, but they can do what they like. And the companies are quite clear in when people seek advice that they can have what they want. It brings in also the role of the funeral director. I'm not talking about funeral directors, there's a lot in the new book about them, as gatekeepers for your choice, telling you what is available for you. So yeah, it's another major change in the insurance agency. But you see, it's part of the death world being full of niche markets. So you get people setting up to weave woven coffins, willow containers, to turn the ashes of your granny into, well, my ring hasn't got granny in it, but you're producing a ring where you might have a bit of granny in it, or statuary for your house. Niche marketing. So the money side of it is significant as well. Jeez.
That's what I was going to ask. Does cost increasingly drive decisions then? Is that why there's a move towards cremation? Because owning a plot of land in a cemetery is very, very expensive.
Yeah, cremations are cheaper generally because you're not buying a headstone. Unless the cemetery or the funeral director sells you curbstones with names on, or markers on walls. There's money to be made. Do you know, yeah, there are a lot of people who like to sell you lots of extras on top of basics, you might say. It's like Sainsbury's Basics and choice quality. You've never tasted it so good, or whatever they call it. You know what I mean? The cremation is cheaper, but then most people would want some kind of marker as well. Woodland burial is quite interesting because by and large, there is variation. They don't allow, by and large, they don't allow headstones, or maybe even little wooden plaques that will decay. Those little posts were rather unusual. So in a way, it's cheaper generally than cemetery funeral because you're not got headstones. But then you might find yourself spending more money on a coffin because you might want one of these nice eco-friendly ones. So being judicious about your expenditure is, you know, quite important. But it's the middle classes more than the working classes who are going in for woodland burial at the moment. Though I am anticipating it will democratise a bit faster, because cremation also entered in the late 19th, early 20th century as an upper class, middle upper class thing. And it didn't democratise until after the first, certainly after the Second World War. Cost is big.
Okay, on that basis, it's time for us to go to eat. Thank you,
Great.
Davies, for demonstrating that a loss-making author can indeed come and talk to us, and for telling me that I was in a cultural desert in terms of my age. That I'm between Tom Brown's school days and Harry Potter, and I had to find out about one of them by reading the Flashman novels.
Oh, fantastic!
So, on that basis, Douglas, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.